Hi, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk, and fortunate to have with me Dr. Jennifer Kirmes, who is the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at the Illinois State Board of Education. So, Jennifer, you've had plenty of busy days here over the last 24 months, right? Lots going on.
We sure have.
in the state of Illinois. Well, we won't get into the obvious things that maybe are on people's minds related to pandemic issues. However, the reason I'm excited to have you here chatting with me a little bit is maybe somewhat pandemic related, and is something really that we've been contending with here in Illinois and probably nationwide, even pre-pandemic, and that's issues related to the educator pipeline. And I know that this is something that is of great interest to the state board and something that the agency has been studying for quite a while. And just very coincidentally or fortunately, something came across my Twitter feed from the Region 9 Comprehensive Center, which used to be the Midwest Regional Centers. It's run by American Institutes of Research, AIR.
That's right.
And now this reconstituted center covers the states of Iowa and Illinois. And the name of the study that they were promoting, that they had done some work on, a summary of findings from Illinois student focus groups and teacher interviews related to the educator pipeline. And I thought, well, I need to take a look at that. So I read through it and saw your name listed there as someone that they obviously shared some appreciation for, because this was something that ISB had initiated. And I know this is something you're directly involved with in your role. So I thought, hey, I'll just reach out to you, and you were gracious enough to accept the invitation to come here and talk to me a little bit about this report. And during our conversation, pre-recording, you shared that this is actually the second phase of a 3-phase project that's going on. So we want to get into those things. But before digging into this research, I'd just like a quick opportunity to find out just a little bit about yourself, because you have some experience in the school setting, or former school leader and all of that stuff in your own right. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Not at all. So I started my career as a teacher. I was a high school science teacher, mostly chemistry, a little bit of physics, and very occasionally some math.
Yeah. That's what I taught, by the way, just so you know. I don't know if we ever connected on that, but there you go. Yeah.
And so I started in the classroom, did some instructional coaching as well in the school setting, which I loved. Eventually decided that could have a bigger impact as a school leader, and so did that in Chicago, in both Chicago public schools and in a charter.
Okay, very good. And then now been with the state board for how long?
For 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So mostly pandemic time.
Absolutely, for sure.
But
2.5 of the longest years in the history of education for all of us here, right? For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
But grateful to be at ISB and working specifically on issues about strengthening and diversifying the educator pipeline, because I think it's one of the most critical issues that there is. So I'm happy to be working on it and to have really great partners like the Region 9 Comprehensive Center to help us think through this, to help us learn what other states are doing, and to help us really focus the work we're doing.
Yeah. So let's get into it here with regards to this research that they've done. So as I referenced before, and you shared with me previously, this is the second phase of a 3-phase effort. So can you help kind of set this up for us? What has occurred, or maybe more broadly, what are the goals and objectives of all phases together? And then if you could kind of walk us through what happened during the first phase, where we are with phase 2, and then where we might be going with phase 3.
Yeah, so if you're familiar with ISB's strategic plan, you know that goal 3 of our strategic plan is all about elevating educators, and really deals with a variety of goals and strategies for strengthening and diversifying the educator workforce, from attracting individuals to the profession, to recruiting them into educator preparation programs, to preparing them, to placing them and retaining them. And what this project is really about is making sure that we have a deep understanding of all the nuances of the workforce, the educator workforce needs here in Illinois. I think when we say shortage, it can almost be a little bit misleading, because in some schools there are definite both acute and chronic challenges with staffing, with having sufficient educators to meet the needs of all the students. And in other schools, there actually aren't shortages. Overall, the teacher workforce in Illinois has actually been growing. And there are some schools that, may have fewer candidates than they used to, but don't have unfilled positions and don't face some of the chronic staffing challenges that other schools do. So to get back to this project, it's really about making sure that we, from the state vantage point, have a good sense of the problem, from the state perspective, but also a deeper understanding of the components of educator shortage across that whole continuum, from preparation all the way through to support and retention, but also understanding it in different ways, understanding how the different phases look for educators of color, where the disproportionalities are in terms of enrollment, in terms of hiring, in terms of placement, how the problem looks different in rural schools from suburban and urban schools. And so that's really what the first phase of the project was. It was looking at all of the data that we have at ISB across, from high school enrollment all the way through high school, through teacher retention. And from there we identified, or we sort of described the problem in greater detail than just saying, 2,000 unfilled positions.
Right. So let me ask you kind of a follow-up question. I'm going to kind of circle us back here to as you were setting this up, is people might be surprised, and I've heard this before, that the teacher workforce is actually growing. We are continuing to graduate people and such. And so can you explain the nuance of that a little bit, if possible, just so people understand it and how that relates even a little bit. I guess the question would be is people would ask the question, how is that possible, right? So I don't know if you have a quick answer to that or not, just from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think that, when I say the workforce is growing, I mean when we look in our employment information system and look at the number of actual positions there are for teachers in particular, we see that each year for the past 5 years, there have been more and more total
You're talking
positions.
About numbers of people that school districts are employing.
Yes.
Okay, so that's an important distinction there that I just wanted to make sure that we clarified. So I appreciate that.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yep. And so it is absolutely the case that the number of teachers who are working in Illinois public schools is growing. It is also the case that there are still a tremendous number of schools who are experiencing significant struggles in finding candidates to fill all their positions and to meet the needs that they have in terms of having sufficient staffing to teach their students. Yeah.
So you, as we were chatting just a little bit before we hit the record button, you were talking about this, and I absolutely agree with you of the importance of really framing this up as an equity-related issue. And I think the thing we have to be careful of is often when we think of equity, we put that in kind of the ethnicity box, right? Or look at it purely from, we've got to be careful with this, is just not putting that purely in how many Black and Latinx teachers, though that is no doubt a real issue for us. We have significant disparities between the numbers of those educators versus our student population right now. So we've got some work to do there. However, you mentioned the real challenges with our rural parts of the state.
That's right. The rural schools have the highest vacancy rate. So when you look at the number of unfilled positions, and you look at just the number, it is clear that most of the unfilled positions are in the more urban and suburban areas. But that is where there are far more positions to begin with, both filled and unfilled.
Interesting.
But when you look very closely, district by district, school by school, at the number of unfilled positions over the total number of positions, so when you look at it as a rate, you see that rural schools have many of the highest vacancy rates. And then when you think about it from the student perspective, it might mean a different experience, because if you're in a much smaller school, no matter what kind of community it's in, if you're in a small urban school or a small rural school, if that school's math department, say, is only 2 teachers and one of them is vacant, that may mean that, and that is the case, for a couple of years, that may mean that a student, only really gets a year or 2 of high school math taught by someone who is fully prepared to be a high school mathematics teacher.
Well, and that's another thing I heard you say previously is about this issue being really localized, right? That obviously we have state policy levers, things that we need to be taking a look at. But I think about my own school experience, and I was a small rural school, about an hour west of Springfield.
I was a small urban school.
Okay, well, there you go, right? So, and now my dad was my principal for 10 years of my life. I don't know if you had to endure that. But
my kids have been in the school of which I was principal, so I saw that one from the other side.
Right. Like, if they ever need to have a little therapy session, I can help them with that.
I might send them your way.
That'd be great. But beyond all of that, though, so a small rural school, K-12, all in one building, 400 students. And I had basically one English teacher, one math teacher through all 4 years of high school. In fact, I had them in 8th grade as well. So I had them pretty much through my entire high school experience. And fortunately for me, they were outstanding. And very blessed in that. But if they were not there, and it was, me in front of a computer screen or whatever, that would have been a whole different kind of experience for me. So I can sure appreciate the whole mindset here that, while we have to look at this from a state policy perspective to an extent, we really do have to be drilling down to what's happening local within each school and within each school community. And it sounds like from the first phase of this research, that's one of the things that you were attempting to do.
That's exactly right. It's a both and. And so we have, as a state, implemented quite a few sort of state level policies to, create general relief across all communities and all schools, or like in one case, I'm thinking about the removal of the basic skills test, right? Remove that barrier for entry into educator preparation programs. With the idea that then you will have more students enrolled, eventually more candidates finishing, and more teachers to staff your schools. But I think we're in a phase now where, there's not much more that we can do generally, because the problem is so complicated and so localized. But the state absolutely wants to support programs and policies and strategies that send resources and supports to the places that need them most. What you just said about the teacher that you had from 8th grade through 12th grade actually reminds me of something that came up in one of the focus groups. And I know we're not quite there yet, but I'll jump us there if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, please do.
So, this I'll back up for a second and just say that the study that sort of prompted this conversation, or the report that prompted this conversation, is a summary of focus groups and interviews that the Region 9 Comprehensive Center and ISB worked on together to really try to get at some of the root causes of these descriptions or components that we identified in the first phase. So if the first phase was about looking at data and understanding the problem, The second phase was about understanding why,
Yeah.
understanding the root causes. And when we asked teachers about both teachers actively teaching in the profession, and we were intentional to interview teachers who had left the profession and ask them why.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up was around working conditions in rural schools where new teachers, because there are fewer students and the need to cover more different courses, the planning load and the opportunity.
More subjects to teach, right?
Right, more subjects to teach, and lack of opportunity for collaboration with someone else who is teaching the same thing you are teaching. You are, Dr. Ayala would say you are the only.
That's right, yeah.
There are a lot of situations across our state where many teachers, whether it's race and ethnicity or whether it's that you're the only chemistry teacher or the only mathematics teacher in a smaller school, where you are the only. And so, there is not as many opportunities. There are not as many opportunities to get support from other teachers who can help you really hone your craft, who can help you with planning, who can help you with the kinds of things that make the work just a tiny bit more sustainable.
Right. Absolutely.
And so
having a friend always helps. Right?
right.
I get it.
Yeah. So that was one of the sort of findings. One of the things we heard repeatedly from teachers reflecting on what some of the challenges were and why it might be the case that there are those higher vacancy rates, as well as other things like lack of accessibility to affordable preparation programs near to many of those communities. Some people can't, necessarily travel across the state and be a full-time college student at a 4-year university straight out of high school, and that's the entry into the teaching profession, is the bachelor's degree with the license. And so another opportunity that I think comes from this root cause analysis, or the root causes in this report, are the opportunities to do some systems level work around aligning and streamlining pathways that start in high school, go into community colleges, and then finish in approved educator preparation programs, and then go back to those same districts. So, sort of very locally focused, contextualized early pathways programs that really are meant to meet the needs of teacher candidates who are going to serve in places of highest need.
Well, and I think that's an important strategy, and trying to figure out how we can get that done in Illinois, because I think right now we're seeing many. I mean, we've had concerns for many years about our high school kids exiting, out of state to go to school. So that's been an issue. But I think we because of technology and everything it now allows, we see people maybe that are staying here, but they're even seeking out of state opportunities in order to do their preparatory work and all of that. And I'm not here to stir up the pot of that, because there's a lot of at play with regards to it. But I do think it behooves us as a state to really be serious about what you describe, of how can we connect what's happening in these local communities with higher ed, and figuring out, what's it's the Goldilocks philosophy here of just hitting just right, making sure that our preparation is still rigorous, but making sure that it's appropriate for the needs of the candidates, and making sure that we provide them the kind of experience that they're looking for and will help them get through. And that's very complex, and I sure understand that, because we're dealing with that obviously in principal preparation right now as well. When you're looking at the data here, you talked about recognizing this as a localized kind of issue, and I absolutely agree with that. Did especially from those that are currently serving as teachers, and maybe the young people thought of this as well. You've referenced a lot about what's happening within the school building, but I'm curious about, as we look at this as a broader economic development kind of an issue, did anybody report out about concerns about going, let's say, to rural parts of the state? Because there's not a movie theater close by, or I can't get on a highway closely to be able to jump to run to St. Louis or up to Chicago or something like that. I'm just curious if anything like that came up for anyone as well.
We did hear many teachers and students attending rural schools felt like, other people don't want to come live here.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't say for sure that is what is sort of driving people away from certain kinds of communities. But I think certainly living conditions and working conditions were themes that came up again and again.
Yeah.
And the research is pretty compelling that teachers who serve in schools that are near to or that are right in the communities from which they came
right.
tend to stay there, tend to be retained at much higher rates. And so that's why I think this highly contextualized approach to preparing teachers makes a lot of sense. Certainly we could, I'm sure somewhere thinks it's a great idea to have a big teach rural campaign, with billboards and flashy advertisements, but there's not a lot of evidence that that gets at the root cause of the problem. And so really, one of the findings one of the sort of reflections, I guess, that we heard again and again from teachers is that the reality of the job did not match their perception of the job or the reasons that they were going into teaching. And so I think, this is, as you've said, a very complex sort of puzzle here because, it's not really an awareness problem per se, and we don't want to send mixed messages about what the job is or give people the wrong idea about what it is. And there are certainly, there's tremendous work that we can and need to still be doing in terms of, creating the kinds of working conditions, organizational capacities, and contexts in which teachers can feel valued, can thrive, can feel, welcomed and included across the state, and that's really important work too. And so, all of this has to kind of happen simultaneously. We can't ignore working conditions, nor can we run a PR campaign about how great teaching is.
The hard's still hard, right? Absolutely.
Right, and if that nets us, 10,000 more people in ed prep, what will it matter if when they get to the classroom, what they're expecting isn't what, isn't, or what they were prepared for isn't what they actually experience. I think this alignment all the way through the pipeline is really important. Yeah. There are, we do have data that suggests that there are a lot of young people who really are looking for opportunities to have careers where they can be of service.
Absolutely.
And where they can make a difference in communities. And there are plenty of young people who say that they absolutely want to be educators. And I think it's up to us to ensure that there are accessible, affordable, streamlined, sensible pathways for them to go through to help them realize those dreams.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, knowing the research around young people today and wanting to do meaningful work, it just doesn't get much more meaningful than being an educator, for sure. So I've got, through this conversation, many questions I could be asking, but I would invite people obviously to read the report. So I'm going to pivot us to looking at phase 3 and what's to come here in this next round of research that's being done.
Yeah. So after we did this root cause phase, we, again, to compile the report, it was based on focus groups with students and interviews with with practicing teachers, with teachers who were no longer teaching, and actually with kind of an interesting group of individuals who went through preparation and got their license, but never taught in Illinois public schools. So trying to figure out what was happening there. And so we used all of the great things that we heard from all those focus groups and interviews and conversations to think about what the root causes are. And then we pulled together a sort of larger stakeholder group that also had still some educators in it, but also stakeholders and advocates and other sort of more policy folks to take a look at these root causes and ask the question, does this seem right? To sort of do a gut check. Is anything missing? And of course it's right, because these are focus groups and interviews. So these are real people, these are their perceptions, their experiences that they have decided to share with us to make sense of, which, is great, especially in the midst of a pandemic, that these folks, these teachers and students gave their time to help us develop a more nuanced understanding of these challenges is tremendous.
Absolutely.
So after the root causes, we did take a look at the report with a sort of larger subset of folks and added a few things that and expanded on a few things. And now what we're doing is we've since done some mapping of all of the components of the shortage as we understand them from the data analysis. And all of the strategies that we know of, many of which ISB is obviously very directly involved in administering or leading, but also there are a lot of other great strategies and initiatives across the state that are happening that ISB is not directly involved in, but that certainly play a role in addressing staffing challenges. And so we took a look at all the strategies we have in place, and we're really thinking about where we have some gaps, where we have opportunities to do more, what the more might be, what the research would suggest, has worked in other places, and looking at, again, drawing that like really straight line between what the data tells us the problem looks like, what the root cause analysis tells us about why it's happening, and the strategy needs to address the root cause. And so thinking about where there are additional opportunities for systems level work, whether that's, encouraging additional pathways programs like we talked about earlier that involve partnerships between districts and community colleges and ed prep programs, work that we're doing with educator preparation programs to diversify their enrollment. That work is really informed by this project. So, this project isn't one that is, we're doing it, we're checking things off, and we're getting it done. This project is really about making sure that everything that we're doing in this space, that every initiative we propose or every program that we tweak in some way or try to scale in some way or try to introduce is rooted in what we know to be true of the problem and is sending resources to where they really need to go.
Right. Rather than just a shotgun approach, right? So just throwing it out there and seeing what sticks. Though there's sometimes, I think, a place for that, but trying to be focused with that. So when do you expect, Jennifer, that we'll see the outcomes of that report?
Well, I think this, the third stage we're in now, I think that in the next couple of months, we will have sort of the full map. And then, like everything else, we'll have some decisions to make about, which programs do we already have that are doing exactly what we want them to do and are working. How do we sustain those? Which programs maybe, had the right intention, but something has gone maybe not quite the way we intended in implementation, maybe because of COVID, maybe not.
Right.
And how do we make sense of what's happening and decide how to, be even more strategic. But again, all of this work really comes back to informing the agency's strategic plan as a whole and thinking about goal 3, which, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to get it exactly right here.
Right.
But when I think about goal 3 of the agency's strategic plan, which drives my work and the work of so many of my colleagues every single day, it's really about ensuring that every single student in every single school has access to a teacher who is well prepared to meet their needs.
Yeah.
And we need to do that through a variety of different preparation programs, through a variety of different, pipeline strategies, and through also attending to retention, right? To taking a look at why
it's better to keep them, right? It's more cost effective and everything like that if we can keep individuals in those seats, for sure.
Yep. And so that's what this is about. This, this isn't a separate, isolated project. It's about, continuing to do the work of making sure that Illinois students have an educator workforce that is ready to meet their needs, that is, sufficient size and that, that reflects the dimensions of diversity that we have in Illinois that is more racially and ethnically diverse.
Right.
And teacher shortage is an equity issue.
That's right.
It absolutely is. It's maybe
for all kids.
The equity issue. And it's a COVID issue too.
That's right.
Because how do we recover? How do we, renew and enter this new phase of education as we, continue moving forward without the educators? They're key to any strategy, anything you can buy with American Rescue Plan Act dollars.
Right.
You need educators to implement those strategies. And so, the workforce is the key. Teachers, educators are the key.
Yeah, I totally agree. And of course, we need people in order to do the work. And it's nice for us to be able to start getting focused back in on these critical issues as we hopefully are, fingers crossed, putting the pandemic behind us, even though we're dealing with the effects of that. Well, thank you for your time, and I'm sure grateful that you're willing to talk with us, through the research that's being done, and then looking at how, the research that's being done can help inform, the things that need to be happening moving forward, and just the concrete nature of it too. That we're looking at real things, real solutions. For our schools, rather than, versus just though there's a place for policy. If we don't see that trickle down and have a positive effect on what's really happening on the ground, then it's not very helpful for us, right? So I'm sure grateful for that. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
we'll have to
my pleasure.
do this again
Thanks.
sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would love to talk to you about where we go from here and what happens next.
Well, let's get the next report out, and we can look at doing that for sure. I'm always glad to have a fellow former chemistry teacher on my...
Anytime.
Very good. All right, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director at IPA, joined by Dr. Jennifer Kirmes, who is the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at the Illinois State Board of Education. As always, if there's anything that IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call or check us out on the web at www.ilprinciples.org. Take care.